A silver wolf darted through the night, its body slicing through the darkness like a phantom. The parasite Queen Antinous stirred with resentment. Her form trembled slightly as she adjusted to the body she had recently taken, a creature from another world called an Imyuntar. It wasn't ideal, but survival left her with no choices. Antinous had barely survived the aftermath of the probability storm. Her original body had been torn apart by the violent force. Death had come within reach, but she had found Lycan, a guide, lying nearby, unconscious and exposed. Without hesitation, she latched onto him. Her parasitic instincts took over, invading his weakened body and claiming it as her own. It was the only reason she still drew breath, but the price was high. Black blood was flowing from Lycan's wounds. His body had been struck by a fragment of the disaster, and as a guide, he lacked the resilience to endure it. His body was already collapsing. Now, Antinous felt her borrowed shell weakening. Time was slipping away from her again. She needed a new host, and fast. Her thoughts burned with images of the humans, the ones who had defeated the disaster of questions. They were the ones who stopped the very catastrophe that had destroyed her home planet, Kronos. Those humans had survived the disaster that had erased her people. A deep hatred festered inside her. What she saw in them wasn't just strength, but a threat. She couldn't accept it. She wouldn't. Just then, something stirred in the air. Antinous stopped. Her antennae twitched violently. A strange wave passed through her senses. It was familiar. An aura that belonged to a royal bloodline. Something she had felt long ago from the insect kings on Kronos. If that aura truly existed here, and if she could claim it, then perhaps she could finally carry out her vengeance. With renewed urgency, Antinous moved. Her pace grew faster, her movements more desperate. The closer she came, the clearer it became. The moment she arrived, Antinous froze in place as her eyes fell upon the source. It was not a creature or a monster, it was a child. Gil-young's eyes lit up under the moonlight. He laughed and claimed Antinous to be his first insect. Morning had already arrived when Dokja opened his eyes. Su-young was the one keeping watch, the last to stand guard through the night. She noticed he had woken up and studied his expression. Something about his face made her react. Sensing that he hadn't rested well, Dokja had seen something while unconscious. A vision from the omniscient reader's viewpoint had triggered in his sleep, showing him something unexpected. Even after waking, his thoughts stayed with Gil-young. He quietly wondered if the boy was safe. He rose from his spot and asked where Senga was. Su-young replied that Senga had gone out early to scout the area. She wanted to look around before the next scenario began. Dokja reminded her that their plan was to wait until the scenario started, but Su-young wasn't satisfied with that answer. She pressed him further, expecting something more concrete from him. There were 5 days left before the scenario would officially begin. Dokja had already thought ahead. If Jungyuk handled the west and the King of Wanderers took care of the north, that would cover a large part of their threat. Su-young then brought up the center. Dokja simply replied that they would handle it together. She didn't seem convinced. According to what she knew, there was a simpler way to prevent the catastrophe at the center. Dokja was caught off guard for a moment. He asked her if she had stolen that idea too, but she denied it. Su-young looked at him with sharp eyes. She wanted to know if he would really go through with it. At that moment, Dokja noticed Senga in the distance. She was waving at them. Her return brought a sense of calm to him. Su-young muttered something under her breath, clearly annoyed. She pointed out that Dokja seemed happier since Senga came back. He responded without hesitation. He could trust Senga. Su-young scoffed under her breath, clearly irritated but said no more. Her frustration was obvious, yet the group had no time for arguments. The clock was ticking. 5 days remained before the next scenario would begin. Without delay, the team moved west, following the edge of the Han River. The air was thick with tension, and the distant growls of monsters echoed through the ruined cityscape as the creatures sensed the presence of intruders. Dokja led the formation with sharp focus. He gave clear instructions. Senga moved to his right, and Su-young was positioned to guard the rear. The group moved as one toward the center of the danger zone. They had 2 objectives. First, they needed to locate Gong Pildu, who had gone missing somewhere along the riverbank. Second, they aimed to sweep the area of monsters to earn coins and strengthen themselves further. The battles came quickly. The team encountered numerous 7th grade monsters, which were dangerous but manageable. With Senga now fully part of the group, they were not only holding their ground, they were overpowering enemies. Even 6th grade monsters once considered a serious threat began to fall before their coordinated attacks. Dokja noticed Senga relying heavily on her stigmas. He cautioned her not to use too many at once. His concern wasn't rooted in past incidents. He remembered the chaos she had once caused, but now his worry was different. Using multiple stigmas together put a dangerous strain on the body, something that the beings from Olympus likely failed to explain to her. He knew how cruel those higher beings could be, how little they cared for the people they granted powers to. Senga gave a small, grateful smile when she realized his words came from genuine concern, but Dokja could sense something deeper behind that smile. She already knew there was quiet strength in her now, a maturity he hadn't seen before. Senga gently reminded him that she wasn't the helpless woman he once protected. In the old world, she had certifications and achievements, but in this new one, none of that mattered. Nothing she had earned before could save her here, and so she decided to change. Power wasn't everything, but to survive, she needed it. Dokja looked at her hands. There were scars there now, marks of battle and effort. Those scars hadn't existed before. She had chosen to adapt, chosen to focus only on what mattered now, not to dwell on her past, but to shape her role in this brutal new reality. A faint vibration traveled through Dokja's arm. He quickly pulled out his smartphone and glanced at the screen. Despite the unstable signal, a notification had managed to reach him. It was a message. Han Dong-hoon had contacted him. Dong-hoon, once known as the Hermit King of Shadows, reported his current state. He mentioned being unable to connect to the internet recently. His messages were delayed, and he was still struggling to control his powers, but the message carried something more important. Dong-hoon was on the Yongsan-gu's side, and with him was Gil-young. Dokja immediately took note. Now, with Jung-hyuk's position known through Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint, and Hee-won's location also clear, most of the pieces were falling into place. Only reunification remained. As for Ji-hae, Jung-hyuk would protect her for the time being. Dokja's next move was set. He turned to Senga and shared what he had learned. Dong-hoon had Gil-young with him, and it was finally time to cross the Han River. Soo-young looked toward the river with him. The wide water shimmered darkly beneath the fading light, but that shimmer was deceptive. Shadows moved beneath the surface. The ichthyosaurs had returned, giant aquatic monsters that had once gathered near Dongho Bridge. Their long, scaled forms now patrolled the river once again, making any attempt to cross seem reckless. Dokja already knew that the bridge near them was completely destroyed. Soo-young was quick to point out that all bridges had been wiped out. Her earlier warnings were proving true. Dokja knew that the ichthyosaurs were level 7 monsters. His current strength was enough to defeat one. It wasn't the same as before. He had grown, but numbers were a problem. There were too many of them. He considered swimming across, but dismissed the idea just as quickly. Meeting one of those creatures in the water would be suicide. He had hoped to find at least one usable bridge intact. Senga asked what they would do next. With no other option, the group began moving along the riverbank, scanning the length of the Han River for hours. They searched, hoping to find even a partial bridge that could be used. But their search turned up something else instead. A group of wanderers gathered near the river. Soo-young instinctively reached for her weapon, her body tense and wary. But before she could act, Senga stepped forward. She calmly opened her backpack and retrieved pieces of monster meat, startling Soo-young. Soo-young was confused, irritated even. In a world where survival demanded caution, Senga's actions seemed naive. She questioned her, but Senga remained calm. Her logic was simple. These people were starving. Soo-young protested again. She understood how dangerous people could be. In an apocalypse, hunger made humans even more frightening than monsters. But in that moment, Senga released a pressure that silenced all argument. A flash of killing intent flickered in her eyes. Senga made her stance clear. Because she had the power to kill, she also had the power to save. Without waiting for anyone's approval, Senga stepped toward the wanderers and handed out the monster meat. The people were stunned. Some hesitated, others accepted it gratefully. A few even bowed their heads in silence, ashamed of their situation but thankful. Soo-young glanced at Dokja, unsure if they were making a mistake, but Dokja brushed it off. It was just leftover meat from the hunts. It wasn't a loss. Dokja separated himself from Soo-young for a moment and reached into his bag, pulling out a Yanaspleta stem. Without hesitation, he handed it over to a man among the starving wanderers. The man accepted it with both hands and bowed deeply, filled with gratitude. Soo-young observed from the side and couldn't help but make a biting remark. Dokja responded lightly, but in truth, his actions were far from selfless. Deep inside, he admitted to himself that it was a calculated move. Soo-young continued to comment, surprised by the actions of Senga. She remarked that women like Senga only existed in fiction, as if Senga had walked out of a novel. Dokja silently agreed. Even before the world had collapsed into scenarios and survival, Senga had always carried herself like the heroine of a story. Graceful, composed, almost unreal. From the crowd of wanderers, a small child stepped forward. A young girl, barely older than Gil-young, approached Dokja and bowed politely. She expressed her thanks with a quiet sincerity that caught his attention. She stood out not only because of her manners, but because of her age. Curious, Dokja asked her where her parents were. The girl's answer was simple but devastating. She had no parents. Both were gone. Dokja paused. It didn't make sense. A child this young, surviving alone until the 5th scenario? In the world of 3 ways to survive the apocalypse, that was nearly impossible. Unless she had been left alone somewhere far from the chaos, her survival defied logic. He instinctively activated the character list, but before he could process anything, the child spoke again. She turned to leave, saying she would go now. She had approached him just to say thank you. Dokja made a small gesture as if to stop her, but his eyes drifted towards Soo-young. She was distracted, looking elsewhere. He hesitated. In the end, he let the girl go, offering a farewell instead. Soo-young muttered something under her breath, clearly irritated. She didn't see the point in wasting time and resources on strangers. The sky began to darken. The shadows of the ruined world stretched long across the ground. Dokja glanced glanced upward and felt the urgency in the air. Night was approaching. There wasn't much time left. He pushed aside his lingering thoughts and began gathering the party members together. Soo-young watched the wandering crowd with narrowed eyes. Her voice was sharp with suspicion as she warned the others. She believed the people they had helped earlier would return, this time with bad intentions. She claimed they had been eyeing the weapons, calculating, waiting for a chance to strike. To her, it was only a matter of time before generosity was repaid with betrayal. Dokja tried to reason with her, reminding her that not everyone became evil just because the world had ended. Time passed. After 1 hour, Soo-young made another bitter remark. She still believed the strangers were coming back, lurking in the shadows, waiting for them to drop their guard. 2 hours passed. Soo-young was growing more tense. She insisted they were being watched. Her words came with certainty, like she was waiting for a knife to the back. 3 hours passed. Frustration poured from Soo-young as she raised her voice, unable to understand why no one had come yet. Dokja chuckled lightly, warning her that her shouting might scare people away, but Soo-young remained alert. Finally, after 4 hours of waiting in the tense quiet, a sound stirred from outside. There were footsteps. Soo-young's expression changed instantly. A sly, victorious smile formed on her lips. To her, this was the proof she had been waiting for. She believed her warning was finally coming true, but Dokja turned to her, puzzled by her excitement. He questioned why she was so pleased. Soo-young pointed at the approaching presence and acted as if her predictions were now undeniable. However, the one who arrived was not an attacker, nor a group of bandits. It was a young girl, the same child who had come earlier during the day. She stood at the edge of the camp holding a blanket in her small arms. She had brought the blanket from somewhere nearby, believing that the group might be cold during the night. The scene froze for a moment. Soo-young's face shifted, caught off guard. Even she couldn't hide her surprise. Senga stared in silence, her usual calm turning blank. In a world where kindness was rare, and danger often came disguised as gratitude, this simple act reminded them all goodwill still existed. Senga stepped forward and smiled gently at the young girl who had brought the blanket. Her voice was warm as she thanked the child for her kindness. She asked if the girl was alone, expressing concern that it was dangerous for someone so young to be wandering around at night. But the girl responded with quiet strength. To her, danger was the same no matter where she went. She had already grown used to surviving in fear. Senga, moved by the child's words, offered her a place among them. She told the girl she could stay with them, that she didn't have to be alone anymore. The child bowed respectfully and declined. She didn't want to be a burden. As the girl turned to leave, a dagger came flying through the air. It landed with a hard thud in front of the child's feet, making her stumble and fall to the ground in fear. The sharp weapon was a warning. Soo-young's voice followed with cold finality. She wasn't letting the girl go. Senga's expression turned to ice. She confronted Soo-young with a sharp tone, demanding to know what she was doing. But Soo-young didn't answer her. Her eyes were fixed on Dokja. Her words weren't for Senga. They were aimed at him. She had seen through him as always. Soo-young asked him to stop pretending. She reminded him that there was a reason why he had chosen to rest there of all places. Dokja cursed inwardly. He had been hoping Soo-young wouldn't put the pieces together so quickly. But of course she had. Soo-young's voice grew sharper. She accused Dokja of playing the role of the kind hero again, acting gentle just because the child looked innocent. But if he wouldn't do what was needed, then she would. She would gladly be the villain if that's what it took. Senga stepped in again, trying to stop the conflict. She couldn't understand what was happening. Why would Soo-young want to kill a helpless child? Soo-young demanded that Dokja to speak. She pushed him to reveal the truth to Senga before things spiraled further. Her patience was gone. If he stayed silent, she would act. Dokja took a breath and closed his eyes. Then he spoke. In 5 days, the child would become the destruction of Seoul. She wasn't just a survivor. She wasn't a random child. She was the final catastrophe of the 5th scenario. And as the truth fell into the night air, notifications rang out in the background. The constellations were watching. Many were intrigued, entertained by how the story was unfolding. That night, the child did not die. Senga stood firm in her decision. She refused to harm the girl, and Dokja silently agreed. Soo-young, filled with frustration, didn't argue further. She hurled an empty can against the wall, the sharp clatter echoing through the abandoned building. Then, without another word, she stormed outside. Her parting words were bitter and short. She was done. They could do whatever they wanted. Only Senga and Dokja remained inside the ruined shelter. The child lay unconscious as silence filled the space. But Dokja's thoughts were racing. He recalled a sentence from The Ways of Survival, one that had always haunted him. The final catastrophe of the 5th scenario was known as the Catastrophe of Floods. It was described as the most dangerous and the most tragic among them all. Senga sat beside the child, brushing her fingers gently through the girl's hair. There was a trace of sorrow in her eyes. She couldn't understand. How could someone like this, a quiet, well-mannered child, become something so destructive? She had seen other catastrophes before. The catastrophe of questions had been strange, unnerving, but this was different. This was just a girl. How could she possibly become a catastrophe in only 5 days? Dokja opened the child's character profile. The name that appeared was Yusung. She was 11 years old, no supporting constellation, just a normal human being. Senga thought a aloud. She had heard that catastrophes were born from meteorites, like monsters or alien beings. But this girl had not fallen from the sky. She was born on Earth, lived on Earth. She had a past, a life. Dokja confirmed it. She hadn't emerged from any celestial rock. She was no invader or experiment. She was still human now, and she would remain human 5 days later. But that was exactly the problem. It wasn't the child who would become the catastrophe. It was her future. That future was the disaster. A potential waiting to awaken, silent and slow, yet unavoidable. That was what Soo-young had recognized. That was why she had called for her death, to end the catastrophe before it began by destroying the girl's timeline. A cruel act, but a solution. One even Jung-hyuk had failed to prevent. Dokja found himself sinking back into the memories of ways of survival. The vivid scene from the novel haunted him. The moment Jung-hyuk stood still, a gaping emptiness where his chest once was. It was a wound far beyond healing, one that only the rare resuscitation skill could mend. A fatal blow dealt not by a monster or demon, but by the girl named Shin Yu-sung. In that past regression, Jung-hyuk had stared at her, struggling to understand. He had asked her why she changed her mind, but she had answered coldly. There was no change. She was the same catastrophe from his second regression, the same girl who had offered him information, hope, and a chance to change everything. But Jung-hyuk had failed. Again. No matter how many times he looped back, he failed. Again and again. That was what made Yu-sung decide that the world wasn't worth saving. It wasn't the world that had changed. It was her resolve that had hardened. She had concluded firmly that this world should end right here, right now. The memory struck Dokja deep. Even though it was a novel, the emotions he had once felt while reading it returned. The hopelessness, the weight of failure, the inevitability of despair. He closed the screen of his phone with a quiet motion. A voice snapped him back to the present. Soo-young had returned, watching him closely. She sensed his hesitation. She reminded him of what Yu-sung had done in Jung-hyuk's third regression. The attack had nearly killed him. Even if he had survived, the point was clear. She had become a catastrophe so overwhelming no one could stop her. Soo-young emphasized that Yu-sung wasn't someone they could fight head on. Not in this timeline. Not when Kim Nam-woon, the only one who had ever come close to stopping her, no longer existed in this regression. Her warning was cold but sharp. Yu-sung had to be killed now before her future emerged. And worse, Soo-young wasn't the only one who thought that way. A few notifications appeared before Dokja. The constellations had been watching. They were intrigued by the weight of his decision. This time the conversation hadn't been filtered. They heard every word, every hesitation. Dokja cursed under his breath. Senga quietly stood near Dokja, her voice soft but firm. She disagreed with what was being suggested. To her, the future wasn't set in stone. She believed that maybe, just maybe, if they cared for Yu-sung with kindness, they could stop her from turning into a catastrophe. But Dokja couldn't share that hope. He knew the truth. The moment that would turn the child into a disaster was still far ahead. There was nothing they could do now to change that outcome. Not yet. Jung-hyuk had already tried in previous regressions. He had searched for Yu-sung as early as he could, tried to reason with her, guide her, but he had failed every single time. Dokja walked over to the young girl. She was quietly eating the meat they had prepared. Her small frame was still and her eyes distant. He sat near her. It was a simple moment, one that might seem ordinary to others, but his mind was burdened with a heavier truth. If they chose to let her live, Seoul could fall into ruin with even the smallest mistake. Killing her now wouldn't affect their journey to the end. In fact, it might prevent a future catastrophe. Then the girl, still chewing, looked up at him. Her voice was quiet, uncertain, but filled with awareness. She asked him if he could see the future. It caught Dokja off guard, but she seemed to already know the answer. She asked if she became a bad person in the future. Dokja admitted it. Yes, she would likely become the worst person in all of Seoul. But the girl wasn't shocked. She wasn't afraid. She simply said she wasn't surprised, because in her eyes, she was already a bad person. She didn't need to explain. Dokja understood more than anyone. He knew how this child had survived in a world like this. He activated Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint to confirm it. And then the truth of her past flowed into him. She had killed her dog in order to survive the very first scenario. She had taken a coat from an elderly man who had collapsed, leaving him to die in the cold. She had killed a woman who used to look after her just to secure her own green zone. She had betrayed a fleeing person, handing them over to an enemy in exchange for a scrap of food. She had done all of this because this was a world where survival demanded cruelty. But even in this brutal world, not everyone could live with the choices they made. Not everyone could convince themselves they had no other option. Yu-sung had tried, but her eyes said everything. She was already breaking inside. She whispered that she deserved punishment, that living wasn't worth it anymore. Dokja understood. For someone so young, she had already walked through a hell that would crush most adults. Her hands were stained with the kind of guilt that never washed away. Her soul was already burdened beyond what a child should ever carry. She looked at Dokja and accepted her fate. If they wanted to kill her, she was ready. Dokja, watching her, felt something stir inside. If he were the main character of this story, the kind who walked the path of brutal necessity, he might have ended her life without a second thought. But he wasn't the protagonist, he was the reader, and a reader should make choices only a reader could make, one based on understanding, on seeing the full story. He reached out and gently patted Yu-sung's head. His choice was clear. Her death wasn't part of the ending he wanted. Jung-hyuk's endless regressions, his determination to change a cursed future, would lose all meaning if everything still led to the same tragedy. If Jung-hyuk ended up killing someone just because of a future that hadn't even come yet, then what was the point of all his suffering? Yu-sung's hands trembled slightly. Her eyes wavered as if for the first time, uncertainty crept into her thoughts. She still believed she had to die, but Dokja gave her hope. There was a way to stop the catastrophe. He didn't need to kill her. He just needed her to help him. The weight in the air shifted. Senga silently exhaled in relief. So-young, however, only sighed, brushing her hair aside as if unwilling to argue further. Yu-sung still didn't believe it. She doubted her worth. She was just a child, with no constellation to protect or guide her. She felt powerless. But Dokja didn't agree. And then notifications began to appear one after another. A system message confirmed it. Dokja had gifted her a growth package. Then another, and another. The messages continued rising in an overwhelming cascade. His actions defied the system's expectations. He was pouring resources into her, not hesitating even once. Yu-sung turned pale in disbelief. She didn't understand why this was happening, but Dokja laughed softly. He told her not to worry. He had more than enough money for this. Behind his smile, though, was a deeper thought, a promise made silently in his heart. He would protect this child, not only for his own sake, but for Jung-hyuk's. This girl who had once become a catastrophe that no one could stop would live this time. She would grow. She would become one of the strongest people in this world. She looked up at him, still unsure, and asked who he really was. He told her simply he was Dokja, and in his mind, the thought settled with full certainty. This child, who might have become a disaster, would instead become his first incarnation in this round. The first person who would walk with him toward the ending he wanted. He looked at her with confidence. Within 5 days, Yu-sung would grow stronger than any of them. Dokja had hoped to rest longer, but the early light of dawn stirred him awake. A faint message rang out in his mind. The constellation known as the demon-like Judge of Fire was encouraging him to take better care of his incarnation. It was Uriel again, constantly watching, constantly concerned. Her message broke his sleep before he even realized it. Since the day before, when Dokja publicly declared himself as a sponsor, the constellations hadn't stopped making noise. They buzzed with curiosity and disbelief. Though he had referred to himself as a supporting constellation for Yu-sung, deep down, he knew the truth. He wasn't truly one. He didn't possess a proper fable. He didn't have a stigma to offer. By definition, he wasn't qualified. And yet, there was one thing he had in abundance. Coins. More coins than most historical grade constellations. That alone made his sponsorship more than symbolic. As if reacting to his thoughts, another notification appeared. The constellation known as the Secretive Plotter was observing him closely, full of intrigue. Dokja silently reflected on that name. At first, he had mistaken this being for just another historical figure, but the calm nature, the generous spending, the mystery around his true identity, none of it matched any ordinary constellation. The name didn't appear in the entire archive of Ways of Survival, and that meant something. Whoever the Secretive Plotter truly was, he wasn't someone simple. In the corner of the abandoned building, Yu-sung had been training non-stop. Even through the long hours of the night, she hadn't stopped. Using the magic power recovery potions Dokja had given her, she continued applying her skills to a young Groll near her. A faint glow shimmered from her body. The energy she emitted gently brushed the skin of the Groll. It was the power of diverse communication, the very same ability that Dokja had once seen used by Gil-young. Despite her exhaustion, Yu-sung was persistent. Dokja glanced at her. Her face was pale. Heavy shadows lay beneath her eyes. She had clearly not slept at all. The system confirmed her actions. Notifications flashed. Yu-sung had activated Diverse Communication Level 8 and Taming Level 7, but fatigue had dulled her focus. Her concentration slipped. The connection between her and the Groll shattered. The monster's body twitched as its instincts took over. Its eyes turned wild. The taming had failed. The Groll roared and lunged forward, charging directly at Yu-sung. Dokja moved, but not fast enough. Before he could do anything, someone else acted. A dagger flew with pinpoint precision, embedding itself in the monster. The Groll collapsed, its breath cut off before it could reach Yu-sung. So-young yawned, turned her head, and went right back to sleep. Yu-sung sat quietly, her breath shallow and her shoulders low with disappointment. She had just failed once again. Dokja stood beside her, watching the way her small hands trembled and how her eyes avoided his. Her face reflected frustration, guilt, and helplessness all at once. Dokja spoke calmly to her, trying to anchor her emotions. Her gloomy expression didn't fade, but she gave a small nod. Then Dokja activated his exclusive skill, Character profile. Immediately, information about Yu Sung flowed before his eyes. He assessed her silently. Since last night, Yu Sung had been pushing herself beyond limits. Thanks to the 2 growth packages he had provided, her skill levels had surged in just a short time. She had advanced faster than any other incarnation her age. Without a doubt, she was receiving more support than any other incarnation in Korea. Her natural talent was undeniable. Her interspecies communication skill was already nearing level 10. Once it evolved into advanced interspecies communication, her control over monsters would become extraordinary. But the real issue was something else. Even with her stats, even with her growth, she still couldn't tame a grade 8 monster. Dokja looked at her, sensing what was truly holding her back. She admitted in a low voice that she didn't believe she had talent, but Dokja knew better. Her body held potential, but her heart was shackled. Deep inside her was the trauma of survival, the violence, the betrayal, the choices she had been forced to make. She had seen death and delivered it just to stay alive, and that kind of pain could not be erased simply with stats or power. He asked her gently if something was weighing on her. She answered honestly. She was afraid. Dokja understood. Monsters weren't companions, they were threats. Beasts born from scenarios meant to break people, but he reminded her of something important, that there was meaning to enduring all of this. If all scenarios were cleared, there would be a reward. One wish could come true. She suddenly looked at his face, studying it with narrow eyes. She pointed out something strange, a small habit he had when lying. Her observation made Dokja recall that Gilyong had once said the same thing. Without waiting, she turned around and faced the monster again. Then she activated her skill once more, her figure small but slowly growing stronger in resolve. Dokja stood quietly, watching Yu Sung. A sudden memory stirred in his mind. He remembered what kind of person she had been in Ways of Survival. In the novel, Yu Sung had always clung to Jung-hyuk. She admired him deeply, praising him constantly, calling him the best. Her childish voice echoed in his mind, always full of excitement for the regressor. She had never been a heroine candidate due to her age. Instead, she held the position of a younger sister to the main characters. But even in that role, she had her moments. Dokja recalled a particular scene where she clashed with Yumiya in a heated argument over Jung-hyuk. The thought unsettled him. After everything he had done, all the resources he had poured into raising her, guiding her, protecting her, would he one day lose her loyalty to Jung-hyuk? Just like in the novel, a strange and ridiculous sense of jealousy formed in his chest. Dokja called out to her, trying to distract himself from his thoughts, but Soo-young immediately pushed him away with a cold attitude. She was still upset, clearly not in the mood for conversation, but Dokja persisted. He asked her something unexpected, how he looked compared to Jung-hyuk. Soo-young gave him a look of disbelief, almost as if she couldn't believe the words coming from his mouth. Dokja tried to explain that he was simply curious. It had been a long time since he thought about his appearance, not since high school, but recent reactions from others, indifference, lack of attention, made him start wondering. He'd even taken a few photos in bathroom mirrors before, thinking he looked decent, but maybe he was wrong. Soo-young didn't give him any comfort. Instead, she told him to accept his fate. Dokja sighed. She wasn't wrong. He looked back at Yu Sung. She was laughing and training again with bright eyes. A dangerous thought passed through his mind. No matter what, he could never let her meet Jung-hyuk. Never. This child was his incarnation, one he had raised carefully. He would not let her be taken away. Time passed, and night returned. The group had finished eating the grilled groll meat. Everyone sat in silence while cleaning up the bones. Senga gave a small prayer after the meal. Dokja noticed and asked her about it. She said she wasn't religious. Still, she had closed her eyes and muttered words in reverence. When asked why she prayed, Senga simply chuckled and said she was praying to the gods of Olympus. Her answer left Dokja speechless. It was such a strange yet realistic thing to say in this world, but it reminded him of something important. In this new reality, the gods they once spoke of as myths were now real. They were no longer ideas, no longer symbols. They were watching, they were active, and they were the ones controlling the fates of incarnations like himself and everyone else around him. As night fell over the ruined building, Dokja made the decision to take watch alongside Soo-young. He told Senga and Yu Sung to rest, knowing they needed sleep to recover. Dokja had spent the entire day hunting monsters in the surrounding area, gathering coins with tireless effort. Every coin he earned had been carefully invested into Yu Sung's stats, increasing her agility and mana to help her unlock greater potential. That effort had finally paid off. Yu Sung had awakened the skill Advanced Interspecies Communication. It was an important step, but not enough. Her taming skill had yet to succeed, and Dokja knew that if she couldn't control the dangerous power within her, the risk would grow. She needed to grow stronger, faster. There was no other way to keep her from becoming a catastrophe. While Dokja was caught in these thoughts, Soo-young interrupted him. She told him to sleep as well. Her voice was distant, holding a tension he understood too well. well, they had not always been on the same side. In the past, they had fought as enemies. And between Soo-young and Senga, their perspectives on life, survival, and leadership were often complete opposites. That distance still lingered in her tone. Suddenly, a notification flashed in front of Dokja. A system message confirmed that someone had defeated the disaster of ice in the western region. He guessed it must have been Jung-hyuk. If that was true, then Jung-hyuk would now be regrouping with Hyun-sung. Everything was moving forward. While he processed that, Soo-young called out to him again. Her tone was sharper now, demanding answers. She questioned what he was truly trying to do. She didn't understand his choices. Destroying the throne, letting Yu-sung live, investing everything in outcomes no one else could predict. His actions made no sense to her. Dokja answered calmly. He wasn't acting randomly. He was following a vision, a specific ending he wanted to see with his own eyes. Soo-young, eyes thoughtful, admitted she once wanted to write her own ending. Dokja asked if she meant in her novel. She nodded. Then he questioned why she plagiarized, telling her she wasn't a bad writer. Soo-young didn't falter. She denied plagiarizing, standing firm in her defense. According to her, 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse wasn't free from influence either. Many novels shared similarities. These days, true originality was hard to find. She claimed her work just happened to resemble TWSA more than most. Dokja pressed further. Hers was not a mild case of similarity. It was nearly identical, but Soo-young had an answer ready. She offered to share a story, a tale of a poor girl who once loved writing, who struggled, who bent under pressure. But Dokja cut her off before she could romanticize her defense. He'd heard enough stories that tried to excuse weakness. He guessed her intentions before she even said them. A girl who abandoned her dreams and used plagiarism as a survival tactic. Soo-young was startled. It was as if he had read her thoughts. But Dokja shook his head, reminding her that he wasn't a god. If he could read minds, he wouldn't be suffering the burden he carried now. Just then, Soo-young activated her skill, lie detection. Dokja saw the notification and understood what she was doing. She challenged him to see for himself. If he truly thought she was lying, now was the time to prove it. The result came swiftly. The system confirmed her words were true. Soo-young admitted that she had indeed read 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, but insisted the similarities in her writing were born from dreams. Dreams that felt too real. She claimed she had only transcribed those dreams into words. Her tone wasn't defensive now, but pensive, as though she herself questioned where her imagination ended and memory began. Dokja watched her carefully. Inwardly, he wondered if she was using her subconscious to shield herself, to justify what could be an unconscious act of imitation. It wasn't impossible. In this strange world, even thoughts could twist under pressure. He reminded her that reading the novel, even unknowingly, could have influenced her dreams. Her defense was shaky, but Soo-young didn't argue. Dokja had often wrestled with a quiet question that never left his mind, one that surfaced ever since Ways of Survival became more than fiction. Had the novel invaded their reality, or had reality molded itself into the novel's script? The thought haunted him, yet also oddly connected him to Soo-young. He told Soo-young to get some rest and offered to take her place in the night watch. Her strange thoughts about existence and fiction had become more frequent, and Dokja joked that if she kept rambling like that, they'd lose their constellation support. Soo-young replied that she was already receiving fewer coins since joining forces with him, to which Dokja remarked that she had a habit of creating frustrating situations. Even then, he admitted to himself that her presence brought him comfort. Despite her abrasive attitude, it was oddly reassuring to know he wasn't the only one aware of the fiction shaping their world. Her awareness, even if annoying at times, made him feel less alone in the absurdity of it all. Sometime during the night, fatigue overtook him. Whether from physical exhaustion or the emotional weight of their strange bond, Dokja unintentionally drifted into sleep. When his eyes opened again, it was already late. Panic surged through him as he realized he had dozed off. He called out instinctively, trying to wake Soo-young and offer to take her shift at last. But when he turned toward her, Soo-young no longer breathed. She lay there still and cold, lifeless. Dokja's heart dropped the moment he checked for Soo-young's pulse, but there was no response. The shock hit deeper than expected. Soo-young was dead. For a long moment, he couldn't think. His mind refused to register it. Senga, still drowsy, noticed something was wrong and got up. Together, she helped examine the body, but there were no wounds. Not a single scratch, cut, or bruise. Nothing that explained her death. Dokja's thoughts raced. If there was no visible harm, could it be poison? But what kind of poison could kill someone like Soo-young so cleanly, without a trace? Senga winced beside him, apologizing quietly. She said she had slept too long. Dokja asked her if she had been asleep the entire night, and she confirmed it. That realization struck him like a wave. None of them had stood guard. Everyone had fallen asleep around the same time he did. But why? How had that happened? Dokja moved to the campfire, where bones from the Groll meal still hung. Sung, that food, something was wrong. He picked through the bones, and green powder dropped to the ground. He recognized it immediately. Yanasplata, a plant whose stem could induce sleep. He asked who had cooked the meal the night before. The answer was clear. It had been Suyong. Dokja sighed. She had tricked them. He looked back at the body lying motionless before him. Pale, cold, lifeless, but not real. This wasn't the real Suyong. It was one of her avatars. Yet the question remained, why would she do this? Due to her temporary pledge, she shouldn't have been able to leave without consequences. Then something strange happened. A faint blue glow flickered from the chest of the corpse. Dokja's instincts flared. He didn't hesitate. Without waiting, he drove his sword into the avatar's head. The blue light exploded outward, and the body fell limp again. This time for real. Only by destroying the head could an avatar be properly erased. Dokja stared at the remains, unsettled. He hadn't known Suyong's avatars could be used this way. There were more layers to her than even he expected. Nearby, Yusung asked quietly if Suyong was truly gone. Dokja replied with resignation. It seemed so. Dokja knew what was coming. Soon they would reunite with the people of Chungmuro, and their reaction to Suyong would not be kind. Senga had already shown her clear distrust, and the others would likely feel the same. That was Suyong's reality. Mistrusted, unwanted, surrounded by wary eyes. For a fleeting moment, Dokja had mistaken her for something more, a companion. But in this world, people like Suyong were always left alone. Where her avatar had dissolved into white powder, a few coins remained, along with a note. On it, she had left a short message. For his troubles. Dokja stood there, lost in thought. Suyong had nothing to gain by staying at his side. She could have left easily, even sacrificed her avatar to do it. Yet, she hadn't. She stayed. He couldn't understand why. Pushing away the thoughts, Dokja got to his feet. It was time to move on. Far away from a tall building overlooking the abandoned structure they had just left, Suyong watched from the shadows. The wind from the Han River cut through her ripped jeans, chilling her skin. She muttered softly to herself, biting her lip. She knew Dokja wouldn't look for her. He couldn't. Just like her, he was a reader. A person who moved toward the end of the story, never turning back. Still, something ached within her. Pulling out her phone, Suyong began typing in her notepad. Reading a book didn't mean you could truly understand people. She knew that well. But somewhere inside her, a thought remained. She would see him again. She didn't know what kind of ending Dokja was chasing, and she wasn't sure if they would be allies or enemies the next time their paths crossed, but she believed they would meet again. Pocketing her phone, Suyong turned away from the ledge and walked off into the city. That afternoon, Yusung reached the scenario's stat cap. Her mana and agility had climbed to the maximum limit of 60. Dokja approached her with an offer. He explained that unlike the constellations, he didn't possess a stigma, nor could he lend divine power, but he had one thing in abundance. Coins. He assured her there would be no pressure. She didn't have to sign any contract if she didn't want to. Yet if she did, he promised she wouldn't regret it. Yusung asked one thing, whether signing would mean she couldn't contract with any other constellations. Dokja nodded in reply, but made it clear he would never interfere in her choices, unlike the others. Yusung didn't hesitate for long. She nodded. She had already made her decision. She had chosen to trust Dokja. A wave of system notifications appeared the moment the contract was finalized. The sponsor contract had been concluded. Dokja had officially become the sponsor of the incarnation Yusung. A radiant light burst forth, wrapping around both Dokja and Yusung, bathing them in an ethereal glow. It looked divine, but the message that followed was far more modest. The system calmly reminded Dokja of his current status. He wasn't a constellation. He lacked access to most of the privileges a true sponsor would possess. But that didn't bother him. He had already anticipated this limitation. Even so, it was a beginning. Dokja was still an incarnation himself, and yet he now had another incarnation under his wing. If he ever signed a contract with a proper constellation, Yusung would automatically fall under that constellation's influence too. It was a small move, but one with massive future implications, and the constellations were already reacting. The more incarnations Dokja brought under his support, the more attention he attracted from potential sponsors. Viewership on his personal channel soared. From somewhere nearby, Baekhyung erupted with excitement as the channel metrics spiked uncontrollably. Without wasting time, Dokja turned to his group. It was time to move again. Their next destination was across the Han River. Senga hesitated. They hadn't found a bridge yet. The idea of swimming across unsettled her, and she voiced her concern. Dokja, however, remained firm. The water level had risen since the previous day. Massive ichthyosaurs, 7th grade threats patrolled the river. Their eerie roars echoed across the water. It was a dangerous route, but it was the one they had to take. Yusung, worried, admitted she couldn't swim. Dokja had already prepared for that. He pulled out a styrofoam box he had secured earlier. He asked Senga to attach it to him using Arachne's spiderweb skill. With that, they were ready. He jumped into the Han River without hesitation, and Senga followed right behind him. As they moved through the water, Senga's voice trembled with unease. The river was dangerous. Dokja reassured her, but not in the way she expected. He explained the plan. They weren't just crossing the river, they were pushing Yusung. They had to act like they were in real danger, so she could awaken her true potential. The threats in the the scenarios would not give her time to grow gently. She had to be forced forward now. Dokja knew the truth about Yu-sung. She seemed like an innocent girl, but she was far from ordinary. From the moment he had met her, he had sensed it. Her awareness, her calculation. She had likely already weighed her options. She would never make it to the 5th scenario as a weak child. This was the moment to change that. Dokja turned to her and offered his final encouragement. He didn't tell her to win, just to stop running and do what she could. Yu-sung's hesitation faded. Her expression hardened with resolve. She activated her innate skill, advanced diverse communication, as if in response, the air around them shifted. Killing intent surged through the water. The predators beneath the surface began to stir. Senga shouted a warning just as the river exploded into chaos. The ichthyosaurs attacked all at once, their sharp fangs slicing through the water from every direction. Dokja reacted instantly. He activated Blade of Faith and swung with precision. The creature thrashed violently, its serpentine form crashing against the surface of the Han River, sending waves and water flying in every direction. The violent force of the water lifted Dokja into the air. Behind him, Yu-sung had lost her grip on the styrofoam box and was also airborne. A sudden movement flashed through the sky. Senga had used the combined power of Hermes' walking method and Arachne's spiderweb to catch Yu-sung in midair, saving her from the fall. The threads wrapped around her tightly, bringing her back to safety. Dokja landed atop the now dead ichthyosaur and used the creature's massive body as a platform. Without hesitation, he began to swing his blade again, cutting down the other ichthyosaurs that were rapidly approaching. He could have used the way of the wind to escape, but he held back. That would have made things too easy. The purpose here wasn't just survival, it was something greater. The stakes needed to be higher. More than a dozen ichthyosaurs rushed toward him, drawn by his presence. From above, Yu-sung watched in Senga's arms, her face twisted in fear and helplessness. She called out, but she couldn't stop the chaos below. Fangs ripped through the air around Dokja, barely missing him as he kept swinging his blade. More of the beast fell, bleeding into the river. The crimson color spread across the water. This pressure was building, and that pressure was needed. Yu-sung's mind wavered. Within her, memories surged. Moments she had spent with Dokja, his kindness, his patience, the way he looked after her even when she didn't think she deserved it. The past rose to the surface. She remembered the dog she had once loved and killed with her own hands. She had cried for days, and now she was being pushed towards something irreversible. In the grip of that emotion, Yu-sung screamed. A flood of system messages exploded into view. Yu-sung was evolving. Her body entered a trance state, her eyes turning white, glowing with raw power. It was just as Dokja had predicted. Everything had been orchestrated to awaken her potential. She activated the skill, Taming, level 9. Her magic power, now maxed out at level 60, surged through the Han River. The very air around her trembled. Her energy poured out like a roaring waterfall. The ichthyosaurs reacted immediately. Their momentum stalled. Their roars faltered. One by one, they began to shake and groan, not from pain, but in reverence. More ichthyosaurs surfaced. The numbers doubled, from a dozen to over 20, all rising to the surface as if pulled by an invisible force. In her thoughts, Yu-sung apologized once again, to the dog she had loved and lost. She made a silent vow to protect him next time, to protect all those who trusted her. Dokja understood in that moment. This was her true identity, the ruler of all monsters, the Beast Lord, Yu-sung. Every ichthyosaur that had once lunged to kill was now under her command. Senga stared in awe as the ichthyosaur glided smoothly across the surface of the Han River. The great beast was completely tamed, following the will of Yu-sung. Even Dokja was caught off guard by the scale of her power. He had believed in her potential, but what she had just accomplished was beyond anything he had expected. They rode on the back of the massive creature, crossing the once deadly waters with ease. Around them, the surface rippled with enchantment. Yu-sung continued to channel her magic, and the waves responded to her presence. The water churned unnaturally, building strength at the center of the river. Then, the current shifted. A sudden whirlpool formed in the middle of Han River. The waters twisted and roared as the ichthyosaurs surrounding it shrieked in alarm. In the next instant, a gigantic splash erupted from the depths. Rising from beneath was a sea monster that dwarfed all the others. Its shadow swallowed the river below it. All the other ichthyosaurs bowed their heads. It was no ordinary monster. It was a tier 5 beast, Queen Mirabad. Dokja's body tensed at the sight. Even the sea commander he once hunted wasn't this massive. He hadn't expected this. The queen had answered the call. As the river calmed, Dokja turned his eyes toward Yu-sung. Her small figure was no longer grounded. She was floating gently in the air, following the trail of her own aura that now stretched out to the towering sea queen. Slowly, Yu-sung reached out. With calm determination, her hand extended and lightly tapped the nose of the monstrous creature, and the world grew still. The waters settled. The pressure in the air dissolved. Yu-sung turned back toward Dokja and Saenga. The ride was ready. They boarded the great beast, and for the first time, Dokja understood a kind of thrill he had never experienced. He recalled Han Myungo once boasting about a luxurious yacht docked at his private Maldives villa, but this was beyond that. That was a boat. This was power. before. If Han Myung-go's yacht was the Gyeongbu Expressway, then this was the Autobahn with no limits. As they moved swiftly across the water, Senga voiced a concern. She wondered aloud about what this power meant. If Yu Sung had become so strong now, then wouldn't the future version, one that had already experienced countless scenarios, be unimaginably stronger? Dokja remained composed. He reassured her, but within, his thoughts were already racing. He had told Senga that the coming catastrophe was the Yu Sung from the future. That much was true, but according to the novel he had once read, the truth was even more complicated. The version of Yu Sung that would appear wasn't from this future. It was a version from another round entirely. Senga questioned if the future version of Yu Sung would remain alive, even if the present one were to die now. Dokja responded with a quiet intensity, introducing her to a concept unknown to her, the disconnected film theory. He explained it simply. He compared each version of Yu Sung's life to a roll of film. The life of their world's Yu Sung was film number 1, but across the many worlds, there could be countless other films. Film number 2, film number 41, and so on. Each reality had its own film. Senga followed closely, her curiosity growing. Dokja pushed the idea further. He asked her to imagine what would happen if the ending of film number 41, perhaps a dark, twisted future, was forcibly connected to the end of film number 1. When played, the film would seem normal at first until it suddenly changed halfway. It would be jarring, unnatural, as if two stories were forced together. Senga quickly caught on. If two films existed independently, then events in one shouldn't affect the other. That realization was the heart of the theory. Dokja affirmed her understanding. If the present Yu Sung was from film number 1 and the catastrophe was from film number 41, then their paths weren't meant to cross. Yet they had been forcibly spliced. Still, Senga's concern hadn't faded. If they were separate, then wouldn't the catastrophe survive, even if the current Yu Sung died? Dokja gave her the final piece of the theory. If film number 1, the present timeline, was burned to ashes, then the spliced segment from film number 41 would burn as well. Because once linked, they were no longer separate. The future version would die with the present one. However, the paradox was that changes to the present Yu Sung, her decisions, her growth, wouldn't affect the future version. The two minds, the two spirits, still stood apart, and that paradox was the very root of the catastrophe that lay ahead. Senga smiled, impressed by the depth of the explanation. She had heard of parallel universes before, but never something like this. Her admiration for Dokja grew, even as he gave a quiet chuckle in response. Inside, Dokja knew the truth. This wasn't some well-known theory. It was the brainchild of Ways of Survival's obscure author, an author whose complex ideas buried the brilliance of the story too deep for most to see. No wonder the novel had been a failure in the world he came from. After some time, the waters of the Han River calmed, the ripples slowly fading under the fading light. The Ichthyosaur Queen lowered her massive body, allowing Dokja, Senga, and Yu Sung to step off onto the other side of the river. With grace, the queen submerged into the depths again, disappearing as if she had never been there. Yu Sung exhaled deeply. The weight of her awakening, the tension of the battle, and the responsibility of her newfound power all seemed to flow out of her in that sigh. But peace didn't last long. From the buildings of Yongsun-gu, a wave of pressure surged. A fierce hostility approached. Out of the shadows between the tall buildings, a massive insect emerged. A giant praying mantis stepped forward, its sharp limbs glinting in the light. Atop its back stood a boy wearing a snapback, eyes narrowed with sharp focus. It was Lee Gil-young. Beside him stood Han Dong-hoon. Two boys stared down at Dokja and the others. It had only been a week since their last meeting, but in the world they now lived in, even a few days changed people. The air around them was different. Dokja's phone vibrated with a message. It was from Dong-hoon, a quiet message of reunion typed with awkward sincerity. Dong-hoon never had a talent for warm greetings, and even now, he kept his distance through short words. Meanwhile, Yu Sung tensed again. The presence of Gil-young stirred something inside her. She stepped closer to Dokja, clinging to his side and hiding behind him. Her eyes locked with Gil-young's. She glared at him, sharp, defensive, and suspicious. Gil-young glared back, equally untrusting. A silent battle of stares began. The tension between them was strange, but understandable. Dokja watched this quietly. In his mind, he couldn't help but note how similar they were. Both carried burdens too large for their age. Both found family in monsters rather than humans. They were shaped by pain and survival, and now they were drawn to him like different ends of the same thread. Dokja turned to Gil-young and asked about Heewon. Gil-young hadn't met her yet, but he believed he had found her direction. His insects were already moving, scouting the lands beyond. She was somewhere in the north. Dokja's thoughts raced. The north was a dangerous area. It was where the king of the wanderers was known to move. If Heewon had gone there, then perhaps she had already come into contact with that mysterious figure. Dokja decided that the group should not move forward just yet. The scenarios were getting more dangerous with every step, and the best thing they could do now was prepare. He instructed the others to stay where they were for a while, to train, to increase their skills, and to gather coins in their spare time. The goal was simple: raise their stats as much as possible before the next major scenario arrived. survived. Then Dokja turned to Senga with a more personal concern. He asked if she had managed to contact her family. Her face changed immediately. The calm expression faded and a shadow passed over her features. It was clear that she hadn't reached out to them yet. Seeing this, Dokja looked to Dong-hoon. Dong-hoon didn't say anything. He just nodded silently, his headphones still resting on his head. A moment later, Senga's smartphone buzzed. It had connected to the internet. She stared at the notification, almost unsure if it was real. Dokja urged her to use this chance. He told her to explain the situation to her family. He didn't know what exactly was coming, but one thing was certain. Once this scenario ended, the outer suburbs of Seoul would no longer be safe. The next stages would bring chaos and death. Her warning could make the difference. Senga asked what would happen. Dokja didn't have a full answer. He only told her that it was important to help them prepare, because this was the best she could do for them, at least for now. She then turned the question back on him. She asked about his own family. Dokja kept his reply short. He said his family was in Seoul and that they were safe, but he didn't say more. He didn't tell her the truth, that he had no family to worry about anymore. Instead, Dokja turned his gaze northward. Something was happening in that direction. He could feel it, and a moment later, a system message confirmed it. A catastrophe in the north had been defeated, specifically the disaster of water. Dokja processed the news quietly. With this, 4 of the 5 regional catastrophes were now taken care of. The catastrophe from the flaming depths of hell in the south, the catastrophe of questions in the east, the catastrophe of ice in the west, and now the catastrophe of water in the north. All had been handled. Only one remained. The final catastrophe was approaching, one born from floods and destruction, the catastrophe of floods. Meanwhile, Heewon stood in the clearing, her body soaked in sweat and blood as her energy sword glowed brightly in the air. The blade moved with intense precision, slicing through dozens of incoming energy strikes. She continued to push herself until her sword finally halted. Slowly, she sheathed it. Heewon decided it was enough for now. The training had reached its peak, and her body had already been pushed close to its limits. She praised the techniques she had just faced, those of Jeonushi, a legendary figure. Her respect for them was clear. A woman who had been training with her smiled and returned the compliment. She acknowledged Heewon's strength and said that once Heewon received her supporting constellation, she might not be able to keep up anymore. Heewon blushed and tried to wave the compliment off, but her skill couldn't be denied. The woman then invited Heewon to join their group, the Nouvelle Vague. She mentioned that their king would be thrilled to have someone like Heewon among them, but Heewon gently refused. She explained that she had friends waiting for her. That connection meant more to her than joining any prestigious faction. The woman respected her answer. She softly hoped that those friends knew just how desperately Heewon was looking for them. Heewon simply replied that they would know. She had faith in them. The woman said she had a feeling, and Heewon, gazing up at the sky with a half smile and a frown mixed together, said she thought someone was already watching her, and she was right. From a distance, Dokja was using Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. He watched her closely. He was relieved to see how well Heewon was growing. In the original novel, her character never had this much importance, but now she was becoming stronger, more vital to the story. He felt proud that his decision to bring her along had been the right one. Then, while still observing through the skill, Dokja's attention shifted. Someone else was also using Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint, and they were focusing on a scene. At first, the details were unclear. He couldn't recognize the person using it, but then something odd appeared on the screen. A familiar face. His own. Suddenly, Dokja realized the scene wasn't a memory, but something happening in real time. Gil-young stood nearby, glaring with fierce eyes. His sharp voice challenged someone to stay away from Dokja. Yu-sung, lying beside Dokja, didn't back down. Yu-sung gripped Dokja's arm possessively while glaring at Gil-young. Gil-young stared back with equal force. Yu-sung complained that Gil-young kept looking at her in a strange way. Gil-young, irritated, demanded to know who she was. Dokja quietly observed from a distance, realizing that these two shared more in common than they knew. Gil-young growled that Dokja hated children like Yu-sung. Yu-sung replied that she knew exactly who Dokja liked. That made Gil-young scoff. The two continued to argue fiercely, each trying to prove they knew Dokja better. Dokja finally stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment he felt like he had been dreaming. He glanced around and saw Gil-young and Yu-sung resting near him, both leaning against something as they slept. For a second, he wasn't sure what he had just seen, but the feeling remained. Maybe it had been real, or maybe just a dream stirred by the strange connections being formed in this new world. Time had passed quickly, and the long-running sub-scenario, which had felt endless, finally came to an end. As the group rested, Yu-sung turned sharply toward Gil-young. Her voice was loud and accusing. She had caught him clinging to Dokja earlier, and she didn't hesitate to point it out. Gil-young didn't deny it. He simply asked what the problem was. Yu-sung, with narrowed eyes, teased him like he was a baby for still hugging someone. Dokja, listening silently, realized something. The strange conversation between the two children wasn't a dream after all. It had really happened. 2 more days passed in a blur, and then a bright notification appeared. An official message from the system. The sub-scenario titled Survival Activities had ended. Suddenly, a familiar presence returned. Paul, the intermediate dokkaebi, reappeared in the air, floating with exaggerated flair. His voice was loud and filled with forced enthusiasm. He welcomed everyone back and announced the long-awaited beginning of the fifth main scenario. Paul admitted there had been a delay, something he brushed off casually, but his appearance told a different story. He looked thinner, slightly worn. Dokja guessed Paul had been scolded by his higher-ups for the delays. As Paul continued, Dokja received a direct communication from Bahyang through the dokkaebi communication channel. Dokja asked what he was doing, to which Bahyang responded with his usual vague smugness. There was no real answer, just a presence watching from behind the scenes. Paul turned back to the crowd. He acknowledged that 4 out of the 5 catastrophes had already been defeated. He clapped mockingly and praised their efforts, but his expression soon changed. He warned them that the final catastrophe they would now face would make the others seem like child's play. There was tension in the air. Shocked whispers ran through the incarnations. Many couldn't believe what they were hearing. Some refused to accept that anything could be worse than what they had already endured. Paul then delivered an ominous warning. Depending on how they performed in this scenario, all of their progress could become meaningless. Everything they had gained so far could be lost in an instant. But even in the darkness of that threat, he offered a sliver of hope. He said that certain beings out there had begun to pity the incarnations. They were watching. They were offering something. Dokja knew what that meant. The final event before the 5th scenario was beginning. With a dramatic snap of his fingers, Paul triggered the second support selection. In an instant, the sky exploded with light. Glowing trails of energy shot outward across the skies of Seoul. Some moved toward the north, others to the west, but the majority of those radiant trails concentrated in central Seoul. That alone was enough to show where most of the incarnations had gathered for the coming scenario. The ground was buzzing with excitement. Cries of hope echoed as the sponsor-less incarnations looked to the sky with wide eyes. Some shouted that they would finally have a sponsor, that they would finally sign a contract. For those who had survived this far alone, it was a moment of overwhelming anticipation. Small stars soon floated above the heads of the sponsor-less incarnations. They were signs. They were being chosen. Yusung, watching the lights and stars with wide eyes, turned to Dokja. Her voice was full of innocent awe as she stared at him. With all the little stars dancing around him, she said he looked just like a Christmas tree. Above Dokja's head, stars began to appear, each one representing a constellation interested in becoming his supporting constellation during the second support selection. The number was overwhelming. All of them had gathered because of a promise Dokja had made inside Dogak's Gamtu. In return for reaching 10,000 subscribers, he had agreed to let them participate. Dokja quickly contacted Bahyang through the dokkaebi communication channel. He had previously given instructions and Bahyang had followed through, though he seemed confused about why Dokja made such a reckless promise. The current subscription count in channel BI7623 was 9,781. Notifications were now popping up. The constellations who loved the Korean peninsula were clearly nervous, watching the numbers with tension. Dokja thought about the constellations who had been watching since the last selection. He felt a bit guilty for turning them away again and again, but there was no other choice. He recognized many of the familiar ones: Seongryong Ryu, the great monk Samyong, General Yusin Kim, the swordmaster of Goryeo, even Dionysus. Some of their nicknames were vague, and he couldn't remember all of them, but their presence was clear. Then something unusual caught his attention. It startled him. Among the names floating above, he saw a title he hadn't expected: Scribe of Heaven. This constellation was no ordinary figure. He was one of the highest-ranking beings in the alignment of pure good, more powerful than even the angels, including Uriel. It was the Archangel Metatron, Heaven's right hand. Dokja was stunned. Even he was here? He began to grasp the weight of the situation. The constellations observing him now weren't just regional figures or minor gods. They were some of the most powerful entities in existence. Another notification appeared. Many constellations were now waiting. They wanted to see if Dokja would keep the promise he had made. Through the dokkaebi communication channel, Dokja asked Bahyang for the current number of subscribers. Bahyang replied tensely, 9,812. Then the count climbed quickly. 14, 16, and kept going. The atmosphere became heavier as Paul's booming voice echoed, announcing there were only 3 minutes remaining until the sponsor selection would end. The number of constellations watching continued to increase. Bahyang's voice grew strained. With just 3 minutes left, everything was now being decided. Dokja observed carefully. The constellations had started competing with their donations. This was exactly what he had hoped for. He hadn't demanded 10,000 subscribers just to escape a single situation. He had no reason to waste this rare opportunity. It was the perfect moment to gather as many coins as possible. With 2 minutes left, Dokja checked again. The number had risen to 9,973. It was almost there. Time ticked down fast. 30 seconds, 20. Some constellations began holding their breath, waiting for the final moment. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3. The sponsor selection ended. Dokja let out a soft sigh and turned to Baehyung, who had a faint smile on his face. The final count for Channel B, we 7623, stood at 9,999. Dokja smiled. He had come so close, just one short of the target. Many constellations erupted in frustration and confusion. They had all been expecting him to choose a sponsor, and now they demanded to know who it would have been. Baehyung stepped in quickly, announcing that he couldn't reveal the incarnation's choice due to privacy rules. Dokja appreciated the way Baehyung handled the crowd. It was just what he needed. Chaos spread. A large number of constellations were in an uproar. Baehyung, trying to regain control, addressed the crowd. He acknowledged that they had narrowly missed the goal of 10,000 subscribers. Still, he offered a reward for their support and attention. Many constellations quieted down, interested in what Baehyung had to say. He spoke directly to their frustrations. He knew they were wondering why an incarnation like Dokja, one they couldn't even control, should be allowed to act freely. So Baehyung presented a solution. Since Dokja had once again refused to choose a sponsor, the constellations should deliver a punishment, and many of them agreed, strongly. Yu-sung asked Dokja why he hadn't picked a supporting constellation. Dokja answered casually, saying he simply didn't feel like it, but deep inside he couldn't deny he had been tempted, especially when he saw the name Metatron. That one moment nearly shook his resolve. Still, Dokja stayed firm. He turned to Senga and told her to take the children and hide. She looked at him, worried, and asked if he had a plan. His face grew darker and he nodded. He told her not to come out until he gave the signal. Right then, a notification dropped. A new bounty scenario had arrived. Just as Dokja had expected, the mission was brutal and clear: to kill the incarnation Dokja in the most violent way possible. The crueler his death, the more coins one would earn. The reward was a staggering 40,000 coins. The crowd fell into shock. 40,000 coins was an enormous amount. Murmurs turned into loud exclamations. Many couldn't believe it. Yu-sung, holding the new scenario, looked terrified. She softly called out for him, but before she could move closer, Senga grabbed her and pulled her back. They both retreated as the surrounding incarnations noticed the glowing target marker above Dokja's head. In seconds, chaos erupted. Incarnations rushed at him from every direction, all with greedy eyes fixed on the bounty. Constellations watching the scenario unfold were entertained. The dokkaebi Baehyung addressed the viewers and explained that during this divine punishment event, they could apply different penalties to Dokja by gifting him coins. Immediately after Baehyung's announcement, Dokja's body grew heavier. A constellation had given him a speed penalty. The more coins he received from viewers, the more penalties were placed on him. Strength, speed, and even defense. Everything was being suppressed. The incarnations, who normally had no chance of catching up to him, were now right behind him. They chased relentlessly, their greed for coins blinding them. Dokja managed a faint smile. Everyone had truly lost their senses for money. He pulled out the blade of faith and swung it to defend himself, but his attack power had dropped significantly. The blade cut through the air, but it couldn't kill. The incarnation screamed and charged forward again. One of them roared with excitement, shouting that Dokja wasn't as strong as expected. Others joined in, more confident now that he was weakened. Dokja kept running. Inwardly, he reminded himself that this was still better than killing the people he didn't want to hurt. If he ended up seriously harming them, things would become even worse. Elsewhere, the other dokkaebis were furious. They questioned Baehyung, demanding to know what he thought he was doing, but Baehyung dismissed their concerns. He claimed it was just a bit of fun before the real game began. Dokja, still running from the crowd, realized the truth. The subscriber count on Baehyung's channel had never crossed 9,999 because it was never meant to. From the beginning, the number was capped. The whole event had been manipulated. The scenario, the punishment, and the chaos. It was all rigged from the start. Through the private dokkaebi communication channel, Baehyung urgently reached out to Dokja. He was clearly nervous, asking if they would really be okay. If they were caught again, they'd be punished for breaking the plausibility rule, something that could lead to serious consequences. Dokja, however, remained calm. He reminded Baehyung that this event was serving as a perfect distraction, just as planned. Baehyung admitted he hadn't expected the plan to actually succeed, but Dokja had. This kind of manipulation was familiar to him. In the game company where he used to work, they had often done things like this. It wasn't something to be proud of, but it worked. Suddenly, a dagger flew out from the crowd and struck Dokja's arm. The sharp pain jolted through his body. Behind him, the incarnations were shouting. They had seen him running toward Han River and believed he had nowhere left to escape. Despite the pain, Dokja broke free from their grasp and threw himself into the cold waters of the Han River. Under the surface, 7th grade ichthyosaurs were waiting. It was as if they had sensed his arrival, eager to feast on his weakened body. Dokja didn't panic. Instead, he activated his exclusive skill, Bookmark. He released Inocheon from the 3rd bookmark slot and replaced him with Yu-sung, the Beast Tamer. The number 3 bookmark activated and his body became surrounded by a glowing light. Suddenly, the scent of the monsters around him shifted. Some of the ichthyosaurs now regarded him with a sense of familiarity, while others remained hostile. He could now feel a deeper connection to the creatures. It was through this new sensitivity that he realized how limited his view of the world had had been before. From the distance, one of the ichthyosaurs responded to his call. A complex pattern of circuits formed in his mind. Skills activated. Advanced diverse communication at level 3 and taming at level 9. Blood began to drip from his nose. This was the pressure the children like Yu Sung must have always felt when using these abilities. He opened his mouth and called for the queen, Queen Mirabad. The massive ichthyosaur queen surged forward through the river. Dokja climbed onto her back as she sliced through the water. Her streamlined body commanded the current. The force of her movement was overwhelming. Dokja struggled to stay balanced. The queen was fast, too fast. She moved like a force of nature, ignoring his attempts to slow her down. Gasping for breath, soaked from head to toe, he looked helpless atop the giant creature. But even if she ignored his comfort, the queen was swimming in the direction he intended. Eventually, the effect of the bookmark faded. As it deactivated, he lost his connection to the queen and tumbled into the water. Coughing and spitting out river water, he raised his head. Before him stretched the land of Nodelsium. Dokja took a breath and examined his surroundings. Though exhausted, he was right where he needed to be. He understood now that while he could use the same skills borrowed through bookmarks, he couldn't wield them with the same precision or ease. Still, the queen had brought him exactly to his destination, even if it felt like she had thrown him aside. He stood at the southwestern edge of Yongsan-gu, right on the island of Nodelseum. This was where the final catastrophe meteorite had landed. Dokja quietly hid behind a tree, holding his breath as he watched the sky above. A few incarnations were flying across the area, their figures cutting through the clouds with practiced ease. He hadn't expected this many people to have learned the flight maneuver skill. These weren't regressors, yet their adaptation to new abilities was impressively fast. One by one, the incarnations landed on Nodelseum, searching every corner of the island. As they looked around, a strong voice rang out across the field. A girl stepped forward, dressed in a black hoodie pulled over her school uniform. It was Jihei. Her presence stopped the men in their tracks. The incarnations turned toward her, surprised by her boldness. But before they could threaten her further, her blade was already in motion. With a clean swing, she slashed through the arm of one of the men. He screamed in agony, clutching the bleeding wound. Recognizing her, the other incarnations panicked. They had heard the stories. She was the one referred to as the naval warfare god. Fear flooded their faces. They didn't expect to see someone of her level here. In a frenzy, they activated flight maneuvers and fled the island. Once the area was clear, Jihei called out to Dokja. She knew he was hiding and reminded him there was no use in doing so. After all, the bounty scenario had already placed a target mark above his head. Dokja stepped out cautiously, wondering if she too intended to kill him. But Jihei grinned, admitting that while she might want to, she wouldn't. Only because her master would probably be upset. Dokja thought to himself that Jung-hyuk would indeed be angry, but mostly because he would have wanted to be the one to kill him. Jihei casually asked how he had been, though the answer was already obvious. Dokja was worn down, hunted, and on the run. He asked her why she wasn't at Taepung Girls High School, where he had assumed she returned, but she explained that Jung-hyuk had come to retrieve her some time ago. Even she didn't know how he had found her. As he looked at her closely, Dokja realized how much she had grown. Her stats were nearly maxed out for the current scenario. Her Demon Slayer and Blade proficiency skills had clearly improved. It left him wondering once again how everyone seemed to grow stronger much faster when he wasn't around. He asked if she was here with Jung-hyuk. Jihei was surprised at the question. She thought Dokja already knew. She told him to look for Jung-hyuk, who was somewhere nearby. Then, noticing the people Dokja had brought along, she questioned his decision to involve them. Dokja answered with a clear purpose. He brought them to hunt down the catastrophe. Jihei looked at Dokja with a calm yet serious expression. She told him there was no need to fight the final catastrophe. It wasn't a threat, not as long as Jung-hyuk was around. That was what Jung-hyuk had told her. He had made it clear the final catastrophe wouldn't cause any real harm under his watch. However, he had also instructed her to stop anyone from setting foot on the island. Hearing this, Dokja's thoughts raced. A sharp sense of urgency filled him. Without another word, he sprinted toward the opposite side of Nodelseum, his heart pounding. He cursed under his breath, struggling with the possibility that Jung-hyuk might be involved in something more than what he had imagined. In the distance, a large man stood near the edge of the river, waving his arms at an approaching ship. He warned the passengers not to enter, calling the place a danger zone. But the people aboard ignored the warning, demanding to know who he was. The man introduced himself as a lieutenant of the 6502 unit. His words were met with disbelief and confusion. Suddenly, one of the incarnations leapt forward with a punch, but it was caught mid-air effortlessly by the towering figure. The lieutenant calmly stated that it was dangerous to resist authority. Without hesitation, he picked the man up as if he were a small child and hurled him across the river. The man soared like a rocket and crashed onto the opposite shore of the Han River. The lieutenant looked around again, asking if anyone else needed help, but the display of power had already shaken the others. Panic spread among them, and they pushed their boats away, fleeing in terror. Inside, Hyunsung was exhausted. His body ached, and fatigue was etched into every line on his face. He silently begged to see Dokja again, desperate for his presence amid the chaos. And then their eyes met. Hyunsung's expression brightened with relief and disbelief. as if he had found water after wandering through a desert. He called out to Dokja and rushed forward, arms wide, but Dokja instinctively took a step back, unsure of what to expect. Before he could say anything, more incarnations arrived and pointed directly at him. The moment shifted. Yunsung's face darkened. He turned to face the new threat and slammed his massive fist into the ground. The ground roared in response. A notification appeared. Yunsung had activated the Stigma, Great Mountain Smash. The force of his attack sent shockwaves through Nodeosium. The edges of the island shattered and chunks of earth exploded into the air. Incarnations were thrown back, their bodies flying like leaves in a storm. Dokja could only stand there, frozen, witnessing the sheer destructive power Hyunsung had unleashed. Dokja closely observed Hyunsung and couldn't hide his thoughts. He was shocked. Somehow, in such a short time, Hyunsung had become unbelievably strong, like a completely different person. It was as if Junghyuk had turned the once modest army lieutenant into a national hero, something like a Captain Korea. Still catching his breath, Dokja asked Hyunsung about Junghyuk's location. He quietly revealed that Junghyuk was at the center of the island. There was no time to waste. Dokja nodded and ran off, ignoring the desperation in Hyunsung's eyes. He had many questions for him, but they would have to wait. Right now, there was something more important, something that needed to be confirmed. He ran through the forest, the branches brushing past his arms and the undergrowth crunching beneath his feet. Time passed as he moved deeper into the center of Nodilseum. Eventually, the trees cleared, revealing a massive meteorite lodged in the heart of the island. Standing in front of the meteorite was a woman, Solhwa. Before Dokja could speak to her, another figure emerged from behind the glowing stone. It was Junghyuk. Dokja walked up and questioned him. Everything about this situation pointed to one possibility, and that possibility terrified him. His mind raced. The meteorite wasn't just a piece of scenery, it was the scenario guide's meteorite. And Junghyuk had done something dangerous. The thought struck Dokja hard. He suspected Junghyuk had fed the meteorite to the catastrophe. That meant the disaster would awaken early, much earlier than it should. Fury rose inside Dokja, his voice filled with frustration as he demanded an answer. How could Junghyuk do something so reckless? Even if they ignored the role of the guide, what plan did he have for controlling the disaster once it awakened? It was insane. Then Junghyuk said something that stopped Dokja for a moment. The catastrophe wasn't just a monster to him, it was once a companion in one of his past lives. In his eyes, the disaster was harmless, but to Dokja, that word harmless only deepened the madness. He clenched his fists as he realized how wrong he had been to think Junghyuk was handling things better this time. Just because he had helped a few times in this regression, Dokja had started to believe that Junghyuk was becoming more stable, but now it was clear. He still rushed toward danger, still made irrational choices, still walked straight into death without hesitation. Dokja could only curse him in his thoughts. Junghyuk was the kind of man who would take 100 steps toward destruction just to get one step closer to the ending. And then, a system notification appeared. The catastrophe of floods was preparing to hatch. Dokja's voice thundered across the island as he ordered Solhwa to take Junghyuk and get off immediately. He knew the danger better than anyone. The disaster of floods was unlike anything they had faced before. It wasn't just another challenge. It was on an entirely different scale. If they didn't all come together and fight with everything they had, it would mean the end. But before he could finish warning them, his voice suddenly shifted into a strange, high-pitched squeak. The unexpected change was because Junghyuk had struck a pressure point with perfect accuracy. Dokja collapsed to the ground, completely paralyzed. Junghyuk's cold warning followed. He had no intention of stopping. Anyone who got in his way, even Dokja, would be treated like an enemy. Dokja tried to resist, but the acupuncture skill had shut down his body entirely. Still lying helpless, he struggled to speak. He tried to tell Junghyuk something critical, something about Yu Sung, but his voice faltered and broke into coughing. He couldn't say more. Just then, the intermediate dokkaebi, Paul, appeared in the sky again. His smug tone carried a dark sense of amusement. He mocked the incarnations for being so eager to awaken something that most planets would do anything to avoid. The very disaster they had hoped to seal had now become the one they were rushing to meet. With a casual snap of his fingers, Paul triggered the event that would shake everything. The meteorite in the forest cracked open with a tremendous sound. Inside, it looked like the inside of a womb, eerie and glowing. A system message flashed in front of every incarnation. The disaster of floods had awakened. A new main scenario had begun. The scenario's conditions were clear. Defeat Yu Sung, now identified as the disaster of floods. Failure meant the complete ruin of Seoul. Inside the meteorite, a woman was revealed. Her skin was pale, and her body was motionless, encased in the fossil-like shell. It was an adult version of Yu Sung, completely nude and surrounded by a strange aura. The sheer shock of seeing her like this was enough to break most minds. But Dokja's exclusive skill, Fourth Wall, activated just in time to protect him from a mental breakdown. Junghyuk calmly stepped forward. The pressure in the air grew intense, and fear spread among the other incarnations. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. A disaster, yet it looked like a girl. girl, Dokja realized something had gone wrong. People had already reached the island. Despite the efforts of Jihei and Hyunsung, they hadn't been able to stop everyone from crossing over. Then, Yusung opened her eyes. White fur began to spread across her body, wrapping her in clothing made from nature itself. The transformation was swift, and with it came a terrifying aura. But even in this powerful form, there was someone who stood without fear. Yu Jong-hyuk. He looked directly at her and spoke. Yusung stared at him in silence before realizing something. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but with recognition. She knew this man. She could feel it deep inside. This wasn't their first meeting. She whispered a word. Captain. Dokja, watching from where he had fallen, understood the truth. In Jung-hyuk's second regression, he had only reached the 46th scenario, and the reason he got that far was because this very disaster, Yu-sung, had once given him information that changed everything. Jung-hyuk looked at Yu-sung and gave a small nod. He admitted that he needed her help. That single moment held weight, but Yu-sung did not move immediately. She asked how many regressions it had been. Jung-hyuk's expression hardened. He questioned her in return, asking why she needed to know that, but Yu-sung was firm. She said she needed to know. There was no hesitation in her voice, only a deep and growing certainty. Dokja, still paralyzed on the ground, screamed inwardly. He wanted to stop Jung-hyuk from answering. He knew this version of Yu-sung was not the same one from the second regression. Back then, she had been willing to help, but now things were different. This Yu-sung had lived through something far darker, something that had changed her completely. Despite Dokja's silent plea, Jung-hyuk answered her question. He said it was the third regression. Yu-sung's body flinched. Her expression shifted. She looked at him, her eyes full of realization and sorrow. Dokja could only remain still, knowing that a terrible mistake had just been made. She confirmed her suspicion. She had hoped she was wrong, but now it was clear. In the second regression, she had shared everything she knew with him. She had even given up her life afterward. It had been her final act of faith, her last gift for the Jung-hyuk she once believed in. But even after all that, he had still failed. She understood now that her sacrifice had meant nothing. Jung-hyuk said that was why he needed even more information this time. His answer was cold, logical, but it ignored the cost she had paid. A shadow fell across Yu-sung's face. There was no anger, only the weight of endless years. Her voice, heavy and broken, revealed the truth. It had taken thousands of years. Thousands. That was the time it had taken for her to fall, to turn into what she now was. A disaster. Dokja could feel it. The fatigue in her expression wasn't just physical. It was the kind of exhaustion born from enduring a time that should have been impossible. And much of that pain had been caused by the very man now asking for her help. The Yu-sung of the 41st round had endured more than any human should. The actions of the Jung-hyuk from that world were worse than murder, and yet she had survived it all. She had endured it, only to stand now, broken and transformed, as the disaster of floods. She told him what it was like. The first 200 years she endured by dedicating herself to humanity. The next 200, she held on with the hope of saving the world. And then came the long, unending stretch of millennia where all she had left were fading memories of her captain and her old companions. That hope had been the only light she had, but now she was asking, what had any of it meant in the end? But Jung-hyuk did not waver. He told her not to speak about meaningless things. Instead, he asked for the message the 44th regression had left behind. Yu-sung's voice cracked with pain as she asked the real question. What had she and the others ever meant to him? Jung-hyuk didn't understand. He was confused. But she continued, her voice stronger now, filled with truth. She told him she had done her best. She had given him a chance to prove he could change, but he hadn't. And now she believed he never would. On the ground, Dokja choked. His body still refused to move under the pressure of the acupuncture skill. He could only watch as the disaster of this moment unfolded before him, just as he had feared. Yu-sung's voice trembled with fury and sorrow. She spoke with the weight of countless years, accusing Jung-hyuk of treating people like tools, like pawns in a game only he understood. She reminded him of what he had done, casting her into the painful, never-ending labyrinth of world lines. Her heart had once longed for him, missed him deeply, but now that pain had turned into something else. Hatred for the way he lived, isolated, detached, as if he were the only one carrying the burden of the world. And finally, she declared that he could never be anyone's savior. The third regression would end here. At that very moment, light exploded from Yu-sung's hands. Dokja, paralyzed just moments before, finally broke free from the pressure point skill holding his body. Without a second thought, he sprinted forward, throwing himself into the ether storm meant for Jung-hyuk. The violent energy slammed into him, tearing through his body. His stomach split open from the force, and his mind went blank from the pain. The impact shook the entire island. A huge crater appeared where the light struck. Dokja's body screamed in pain. The agony was sharp and consuming. Blood poured from his wound, and the sky above had turned a heavy yellow. This was the reality of their world, so fragile that a single mistake could lead to destruction. His breathing grew fast and shallow. He knew how lucky he had been to survive until now, but this time was different. Junghyuk stared down at him in shock. He hadn't expected Dokja to throw himself into danger like that. Dokja, barely conscious, gave him a tired smile. There was no point in dramatics now. He told Junghyuk to finish him off. There was only a minute left. His organs were gone. Blood continued to pour from his mouth, and he could barely stay awake. He tried to joke through it, offering himself up so Junghyuk could collect the coins. Junghyuk didn't move. He just looked at Dokja with an expression that hadn't been seen in a long time. The same one he had worn when they first met in the subway, back when everything was just beginning. But this time, he refused. He couldn't bring himself to do it. Dokja's vision dimmed. He saw Junghyuk trying to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. Not even Seolhwa could save someone who had lost this much. His consciousness started slipping away, fading like a sandcastle breaking apart in the wind. And then, death came. Everything turned to silence. But a moment later, a system message rang out. His karma points had reached the maximum, 100 out of 100. It was enough to activate a special privilege. The privilege of the King of No Killing had been triggered. However, due to a conflict with his exclusive skill, there would be a delay. Because of his death, Dokja's consciousness had broken free from the limits of his body. His exclusive skill, Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint, had reached stage 3. Darkness surrounded him once more. He opened his eyes in that familiar cold void. This place was neither death nor life, just an in-between state. And the feeling, this disgusting, heavy feeling, was back again. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.